it's interesting because having another person with a business partner, and it was originally his idea, and I got brought on as like being the person who kind of helped with like maybe logistics and back end. Actually, that story is kind of interesting because you're talking about your connection between you and Gabby. I'll give you this
Yeah.
story because it's really cool.
Yeah.
So the how I met my Hunter, my business partner, was through the most happenstance way. Like he lives over in he grew up in the New York area. I grew up there, but I never met him. It was at a job I was at. I worked at AT&T at the time. I was a phone sales rep, and I was going to a training. And my boss was like, "Oh, you could go either this place, like New Hampshire, or like Atlanta." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, "I'm going to send you to Atlanta." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Big training, fun. Go down." And there's all these people from all around the country. And there was one guy, which is a friend of this person, Hunter, named Gabe, and he was from Queensbury, New York. And I'm like, what are the chances this person's like, give you context, like 45 minutes away from where I live? Like, that's weird. So I got to connect. So connected with this guy, and I was like, oh, hit it off, friends. And through that, we just would have random hangouts and stuff. And that's how I met Hunter. And then at the time, I would do some podcasting. I had a college radio show, nothing of it. And then COVID happened, and I kind of brought the show back because I could tell my guy friends were sort of down bad on their luck. They're like emotionally. And he's like, man, you're really good at what you do, and you should probably help me out. And it's crazy how one little happenstance led to everything. And there's so many connections with that. Like, if we didn't meet this person, we wouldn't have had an interview with like a celeb or like I think we did a live dating show at it's called Funny Bone in the Albany area, and we hit like sold 250 tickets or on the news. And that wouldn't happen unless we met like one person doing a street interview. And it's just crazy to see the story arc. And I feel like if anything from this, when you're putting yourself out there or just meeting somebody in a community, you don't know what one connection is going to change your life that way.
Max, right? Like we've talked about that, and that I mean, there's no better advice, right? Like I feel the same way. You just never know what's going to come of it. So, and I know it's easier said than done a lot of times to put yourself out there, but it is true, right? Like Gabby, we've talked about that. If Gabby doesn't like reach out and say, hey, like I really connected to something in your content and want to ask you this or want to talk to you about that, then like, we don't become friends. She doesn't start. We now have this outside of this. We now have this amazing work relationship with the Outer Loop where she's doing all of our amazing new content for all the Outer Loop and Humanity Project stuff. So like, if she doesn't reach out, that doesn't happen. We don't have this conversation. Like, I hear you. Like that's it's hard. I mean, again, easier said than done, but it is true just to let people know that you just don't know what's going to come of it. And I would argue on the neurodivergent side of things, that if we all go with our gut, which we should trust more often than we maybe were initially taught to trust, then when we do reach out, those are probably going to be pretty awesome connections being made.
Alignment.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Totally. So yeah, you said that was all amazing context, and you had said to me when we were talking about what doing this, that you felt like you had a pretty like unique journey, and that might be interesting and helpful for people to hear.
Yeah, I should give that context too. So for me, with my journey with autism or spectrum, is I grew up, and it's funny, before this interview, I kind of hit my mom up and said, yo, can you give me some like background on like this early detection so I can just more to it. So she really noticed at a young age when I was like 3 that I had issues with talking, right? I had issues with my speech, but at the same time I could read, which was ahead of my curve. So it was a very interesting like kind of trend there. So I was like, oh, put pizza, but I would spell it out and read it. And it was like, okay, that's weird. Why is he advancing one thing behind back then? And this, for context, I'm 36. So this is like the early 90s when my mom's going through this, like pre-internet. Sidecar, I learned that I guess my Aunt Diane, so your mother-in-law, was a big help back then because she had a computer. That was very...
Because of Bob, right? Because Bob,
Yes. So that helped with a lot of the research that my mom sort of self did to kind of understand this for me.
That's cool.
And going to different specialists, they kind of realized like, okay, I had like maybe different things cognitively with like, I did really well with like memorization, right? But maybe like I could think of stuff faster than I can spit it out. And that's a trend I noticed. So that was something for me. And I think going to different specialists when I was younger, through schooling and speech therapy was a big one for me. By the time I hit like 2nd, 3rd grade, I was kind of more in like general classes and high functioning outside maybe the speech therapy. And then when I got to like sixth grade, I got kind of worked through. And that was
Cool.
sort of the extent of like my education piece when I was younger.
Right.
Other than that, I just sort of existed. And mind you, to give context to the audience, I had no clue that I had something there. And mind you, when you're younger, you maybe don't have those conversations. And when you're older, your parents explain. Well,
Right.
that never really came. And I don't think it was any ill intent. It was just more of life happened. So then I flash forward to like maybe I was like 30 years old, 29, and I was talking to my younger brother on the phone. And he was like, yeah, like mom's always talking about like, your journey with like autism and so and so. And I was like, oh, like that's the thing. That's what I have. He's like, yeah, like you didn't know. And I'm like, no. And but as soon as it happened, and of course, like as an adult, understanding the conditions of stuff, I'm like, oh my god, this explains so much. This explains like issues with eye contact, or and not like a negative way, but just like the impulse to do this, or a lot of times like not doing well, maybe with confrontation and using like maybe the skill sets I have to kind of de-escalate situations.
Yeah.
Or one thing I was watching a clip that you talked about, Gabby, like mimicking other behavior in an area, just for like your social cues. And I was like, a lot of these things, like this makes so much sense. And I remember asking my mom, like, why didn't you tell me? And of course, she felt a guilt of like, I'm sorry, I don't want you to think I was holding. I just thought you acclimated so well that you didn't. I didn't want you to hold you back, because I think back then it was more of a stigma of negativity, because she would have either friends or it was kind of maybe arguments with my parents at the time. Around that time too, there was a divorce, so that's some context too here. So my parents split, and then I lived primarily with my mom, and then we have like visit my dad. But during this time, there was kind of that like, oh, maybe he doesn't have this condition, like brushing it off, and versus like, no, he does. And that kind of led to the whole thing. But she almost felt sad when I like told her in adulthood, like, oh, I found out. I was like, no, I'm not bad. Like, if anything, like, okay, this explains a lot to me, right? And almost can like, now I can lean into something and understand, or like when I'm looking up other stuff. So that was kind of my journey for it, of like just pure oblivion. But it wasn't like, I know some people find out later in life. So there was the proactive steps to give me in a spot to thrive and do well, which is amazing. But as me as the person, I wasn't aware. And so that's kind of the interesting dynamic with it.
Yeah, so even though there was some recognition early on as a kid by, it sounds like primarily your mom and the work the research she was doing, it wasn't something she then like didn't really necessarily give you that information, not in a bad way, just because she felt like you were doing fine, but you didn't like have that information growing up to go, oh, this is why I'm this way.
Right, and it was more for social things than education. I think education, I rather quick. I like one thing actually I could tie to my grandfather passing, that Rachel's grandfather, is he has amazing memory, and that's always been something I have super well. I can remember, like they call it the moment of consciousness, but basically from like 4 years old on, I can tell you just about anything that I remember in my life, and it's hard, and it's one of those where it's like that's crazy. But like if you talk, you probably know from talking to Fred, he would remember things when he was like shining shoes. All the way in the 30s, and that's a correlation. Or
So
I've always been great with navigation, right? Like I can drive a route once. Like I used to do craft shows with my dad and grandfather, and once I know a route, like, oh yeah, I get to like Detroit, Michigan, I would tell you blah blah blah. I wouldn't have to look like I was always the human GPS was the joking term, but I was just looking at maps, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm just probably a map nerd, whatever. And it'd be like, no, that's probably part of the autism spectrum.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that's so amazing.
That's so cool. Yeah.
So when you're on the phone with your brother and he says that and it starts to click for you, after that, how does life then, how many years, roughly how long ago is that conversation?
About like 4 years ago, 4 years ago.
So then after that, like how does life start to change for you if it does? Like how do you start to navigate differently if you do, or anything different?
In a weird way, I almost like I had more pride in myself. I think sometimes when I had certain holdups, I was like, man, why am I feeling like I was like so like I messed up? Like a lot of the first thing I felt when my brother told me was I went back to any awkward moment I had socially and being like, no wonder I couldn't get X, Y, and Z girl crush in high school, because like, and it was just stuff like that. I'm like, oh, that explains this, and that explains this, and it's like, why do I say like have a certain tick or a certain look? And I'm like, it was like just like the memes where it's like the head exploding.
That's how I felt too.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right? Like you've talked about that
the
too,
head
Gabby.
Exploding,
yeah.
Yeah,
like,
they're almost like euphoric. Wow. Yeah, you're
Yes,
like,
it was so euphoric. And so that's why when I was talking to my mom about it and she felt this guilt, like, I'm sorry. Like, no,
Yeah.
no, don't be sorry. Like,
Yeah.
you did the stuff to get me to
Yeah.
where I wouldn't be held back from a learning standpoint. So thank you, God,
That's
you did
awesome.
that.
Yeah.
If anything, it was just more of like, first thoughts was like, okay, socially, like that explains this stuff.
Yeah.
Second thought, and to give a dynamic, like I've had some estrangement with my family, with my dad on and off. We're working through it, but through that, I'm like, okay, how many things, if we ever had disagreements or arguments, were hung up by like, and I, this is something where I'm going to say it, but I can't speak for him. This is just me in my head. And I hope to
Sure.
have these
Sure.
conversations with him, but like, did that lead to like I was like damaged goods? Like, did that explain certain things? And it's like, okay, because there's a lot of dynamic in that situation with my family where I was like, I could tell he maybe did it in love, but almost like love of like, okay, if not, he's going to just squander and fail and not realizing the thriving because he viewed it in a totally different light than the other parent did. And it was one of these things where I'm like, okay, this might explain some stuff. And not that I hold it against anyone, but it's like, okay, was this part of the dynamic that I'm not hearing, right? I'm not like privy to. And there's different ways I was maybe treated differently from, because to give the context between my mom and dad, I'm the only child. And then they both separated and remarried with their own children. So they're like I treat them like full siblings, but technically they're half siblings. So
Sure.
And with both parents, with like the step parents that came in, right, they treat the other kids differently than me. And there was maybe like that Cinderella effect, not too extreme, but like there was that. And so it's like, okay, that explains a lot of these things. And then with like falling out to like, oh my gosh, it was more of like me just sort of like solving the puzzle with everything.
Yeah.
I don't have those answers now, but it's like, oh, well, that might explain this one situation or this like happening,
And how do you, so I hear a lot from, and like we all have different experiences, obviously, and not one person's way through this either getting like diagnosed or just learning about it whenever. Everybody's different, but like, it sounds like you viewed it all in a positive way of like, cool, I'm learning all this and I'm like able to navigate better. Because I hear from a lot of people, and I felt it a little bit, and I think, I think Gabby and I've talked about it a little bit too, but similarly, that there's also maybe this feeling of a little bit of like, almost like a loss or a grieving of like, if I'd known sooner. Did you feel any of that, or
a little bit? I think more for the social things because when I was younger and I was talking about early on is that I moved around. So to give a tiny bit of background, I lived in like the upstate New York area as a kid. Parents split, and then when my mom remarried, my stepdad wanted to finish his schooling in Idaho. So moved, family court, all that drama. Moved cross country, would do summers at my dad's in Vermont. Did that for about 5 years. Moved back east. And so anyway, I moved around a lot, like 5-6 times before I graduated high school. Wow. So I kind of had that disconnect of like, I had friends, but then you lose them. And some towns I lived in was much better for the connection. And then some towns, like the town I went to high school, it was like maybe like a graduating class of 100. The town was like 5,000 people. And had this energy of like, okay, my joking is if you weren't throwing mud at each other in the sandbox in kindergarten, you were a weird outsider. And my charisma and optimism got me through to where they liked me in the end, but it was of a 5-year journey in that area I lived. It probably took about 2.5 years to get to that point. And so some of those things made me realize, wow, like if that was kind of the stuff that made me feel sad, like, man, if I knew maybe I could handle and navigate better or even just communicate better, like, hey, this happened. Like I've naturally always been an outgoing person. And it's interesting because my outgoingness, I think sometimes now understanding my spectrum was almost a way of like, I would adapt quickly because I knew that was almost a survival
skill. Survival mechanism.
Like, because I am extroverted, but I have moments I want to feel introverted, right? And like, so sometimes I have issues maybe opening up more publicly. Not that I don't want to, I would love to, but I almost think the world around me, frankly, doesn't. Are we allowed to swear?
No, you're good.
Okay, frankly, doesn't give a shit, Like, so it's just. Yeah, it's like, okay, like I know these other people are more self-absorbed with their feelings, so I'm always been like kind of in the friend group, like the therapist. Everyone kind of comes to me for advice, and I've always naturally don't mind that, but sometimes there's that drain, and that's been always a tough thing. So maybe that's what you're talking about. I've noticed that motion where it's like, man, like I wish I could have explained myself. I would have avoided certain things that happened to me that made me feel like, oh, I'm dopey or whatever, at the
time. Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I feel the same way. You're married, right?
Yes.
And is your wife neurodivergent or neurotypical or somewhere
No,
in
not to
between?
my knowledge. No.
Yeah,
I think everyone has their own journey, but
sure.
no, yeah. So for her, I think she knows little ticks and stuff, but maybe didn't apply it to being something. But similar maybe to Rachel, but then realized like, okay, that's great, and that explains that for you. But she's always been super supportive and helpful for me.
Yeah. How long have you guys known each other?
So let's see, we've been married for 11 years now, and then so about 13 years probably together. So
Wow.
yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
So how do you find I know this is a kind of a subject that comes up a lot, and then we get a lot of questions and comments on the husband account in relationships, right? Like, so I always found it before I got diagnosed and understood why I am the way I am. I always found it really difficult to share a space with someone. And right, so I would have these relationships that lasted maybe 6 months or a year before I met Rachel. That lasted 6 months or a year, and then like if someone would be in my space too much or would want to move in or whatever, that's when it would go all wacky because I didn't know why, but it was like an intrusion on my space. But as I got older and I learned a little bit more about and also I'm an only child as well, so sharing space was foreign to me to begin with. So I know a lot of people ask us on the other channel, like, how does it work? Like being in a relationship with someone when you have these certain kind of, needs about how your space should or shouldn't be. And how does that feel to share? Are there challenges that you feel like you face or you and your wife face? And how do you approach that?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think for me, it may be from the moving around and having parents that divorced at such a cognitive time in my life when I was younger. Like, so me getting thrown into situations, well, I've always had that adaptability. So that might be an outlier maybe to other patterns. But the one area I would say that we navigate is almost like if like a crowded situation, like out in public, or conversations where I'm getting a lot of information. Because the thing I'll do a lot of times is my brain will always like million miles a minute, and sometimes if I'm negative, like spiral right in my own head. So a lot of times I have to tell my wife, I'm like, hey, like listen, like I'm just not hearing it right now. And nothing they're doing, but like if you want me to actually process this, I just need a minute. Like that's some more as conversation or like obtaining information. Like those are the things. Space wise, relatively good. Yeah, like there's obviously little funny ticks, like, oh yeah, like the fabric feels weird, like in this one spot or stuff like that. But it's not
Right.
too bad for
That's
me.
cool.
But definitely more like you said, kind of conversation, communication pieces, or just like out and about and like just a sensory overload. I think that's a
Yeah.
thing that I will have sometimes. And almost actually, great example. We were talking about that music festival I went to. We were in, and you hopped on, Gabby, but I went to this festival down in Maryland, and we were in the pouring rain one of the nights, and I was able to like mentally prep myself, like, yeah, I'm good for like this like 1 hour, 2 hours, and then when we were waiting between sets and knew another 90 minutes was coming, my wife wanted to get closer to the stage, her favorite artist. And we got closer and it was like sardine cans. And I had that shutdown moment. And she looked in my eyes like, are you okay? And I'm like, I'll be all right. Cause it was just like, I'm soaking wet. Like it was like checking boxes of like, okay, this problem's occurring, this problem's occurring, this problem's occurring.
Yeah.
I got this, and I'm trying to be there for her, and I can do this. And then at one point, she's like, it's gonna be okay. We've seen this guy twice in the same album cycle. I'm like, okay, I think you have a point. We're good. And it did. It felt really great. But I sometimes am very, and she's the same to me too, like very giving where I'll take the sacrifice to that. But yeah, on paper, like my bars are just all over the map where I'm like, yeah this is like too much right now.
You go through that, right, Gabby?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that kind of feels like how I feel with my kid. So yeah, just sometimes I'm just like, oh, I'm
sometimes
like
you'd be amazed with yourself
sacrifice
that you can multitask, right? And then there's times where it's like, nope. Like, and it's interesting because I always love reverse engineering things. Like, I'm always like, I'll have a friend tell me like, oh, I feel like I'm pissed off, or my wife like, oh, it's always being a bitch. And it's like, why?
Yeah,
I don't
why?
know.
Like, I love
I'm
that
like,
too.
no,
Yeah.
I need to know because like,
Yeah.
there's obviously a reason you got to this point. Like, whether it's like the coffee's too hot or your dad said something wrong to you. She works at tax practice, so like, if there's like a dynamic there, like, there's something to get there. And I just get hung up on like there's a strength to this because then it's like fixing the problem, right? It's just like it's not like any ill intent. It's just like there's obviously a
You
reason.
Want to know why?
Yeah.
Do you get that, Gabby?
Yeah.
With your son. Yeah.
Yeah.
You do?
So,
Okay.
yeah.
You want to know
Just like,
why?
And also, yeah, just in general, like what you were saying before, just pushing yourself. I guess it's like, is masking worth it? Like, what is masking worth it for, and then what is it not worth it for? I guess that's where I'm kind of navigating
Yeah.
now. And so, yeah, sometimes I'll do that. I'll just like push myself, and I'll see it. Like, I'm like, oh, I know that I'm doing, like, all these things are like rising up. So it's good to be aware of it. But I I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's sometimes it's like long term things of how much you put up with, and then there's short term.
Yes.
We're just
Yeah.
like okay, like the gas station's too busy right now. I just got to step out. It's like why? It's like I can't.
I can't. I just can't.
I just can't.
Later, you're like I'm good, but like
Yeah.
9 out of 10 times you could be in that same scenario and like you're fine.
Yes. Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because it's just this different sensory overload happening. And it doesn't, I used to have the same thing when Rachel and I were living in New York, and I would get on the subway, and sometimes I would step on the subway and have to step immediately off and not be able to tell you why. Just say, I can't be on the train right now. And then like the next train would come and I could get on it and ride to my stop. And it was just, you know, maybe it was too hot in the first car, but also the noise. And, you know, so it was like, so, right? Heat for sure. Which listen to this bananas thing that can't be really explained, is heat for sure, right? Major issue. But then where do I spend most of my time? In Tanzania on the equator. Yeah. And like, so, you know, we did that one video about like, it's got to be about the environment and the expectations too, because there I know that I don't have control over the heat. And, you know, so I'm going into it with the expectation and the understanding that I already know it's going to be hot and I can't do anything about it. Whereas here I can control, like if I can't, no, it shouldn't be hot right now. You know, it's something to do with that, right?
No, that's very true. Like I'm a very terrible like backseat driver. And so like it's one of those like I can notice my temperature gets hot, so I don't like that. And then it's like you have these random long yawnings, and then you have the nausea kick in, and you're like, because you're right, and who knows if you really dig in deep on it, it's like, is it like a control thing? Because I'm not driving. Like who knows? Like, but I've always had that as a kid too. So yeah.